First thing I would do is create, now you can easily do it through virtual, user groups, if you will. Create, I'd get my 10 best customers, 10 best people I know. I'd get them here and we'd talk about everything that's bugging them.
Hello and welcome to the Healthtech Marketing Podcast, brought to you by HIMSS and Health Launchpad. So I want to thank you for joining this podcast today, listening in. And I also want to give a big thank you to my partner in crime here, the awesome HIMSS. I'm so grateful to be working with them on this podcast. And, if this is the first one that you're listening to, just a quick, why are we doing this thing? So the reason we're doing this is that anyone who's spent more than 5 minutes in healthcare knows that healthcare is incredibly hard to sell to. I don't think there is a market that is as hard and as challenging to market and sell to as healthcare. So the reason for this podcast is it's an opportunity for you to hear from leaders in the healthcare sales, marketing, and purchasing world, and hear from them about insights on that you can benefit from that are going to help you in your job. And so this is a real practical podcast, and we hope that you can listen to this, and after 30 minutes, you can say, hey, there's 3 ideas I can start implementing today. Now, I'm really excited about my guest today. He is, I think I would somebody call an old mate, somebody I've known now for probably a couple of years, and who is a real leader in the whole area of purchasing, sales, marketing, and networking in the healthcare industry. And I'm so delighted I'm going to introduce my guest to you, Waldrop. So he's the founder and president of the Institute of Healthcare Executives and Suppliers. So Hayes, welcome to the show. Tell us about yourself and tell us about your organization.
Well, first of all, I'm flattered to be here, Adam, and that I'd love to meet the guy that you just introduced, because that was pretty nice. And also, I want to get this out of the way, Adam. I mean, you're not going to make me cry on this thing, are you?
Hope not.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I was trying to get my emotions ready, but yeah, I love doing things like this. And to your point, I've kind of done a lot of different things here in healthcare for the last 20 years. I've been doing, I have 3 different groups that I host and lead. I founded, if you will, but I've got a hospital system CEO group, got a supply chain group, and there's a pharmacy group. And what that means is I have relationships with those 3 different levels in healthcare systems all across the U.S. It's probably nearly 200 or so executives that I know. We bring those execs together in 3 different meetings. Again, a CEO, supply chain, and pharmacy. Bring them together and allow companies the access to meet with them, to engage with them, and learn from them in what we call panels or focus groups. So, yeah, I've been in the I'm Switzerland. I'm in the middle of both parties, the suppliers and the suppliers and the providers. And I and if you boil it all down, I put smart people together in rooms and good things happen. If you really want to say it in one simple sentence.
So you've got. To break down the members a bit, particularly on the sort of the healthcare supplier and sales side. So because you've got buyers and you've got vendors. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, as it relates to, let's just say we'll pick one of the groups. Let's say my supply chain group. Let's say, we've got companies such as the Owens and Minors, the large distributors. We have, the GEs or the Philips, the large capital equipment companies. Then we literally have companies who are literally startups. I love telling the story about 2 or 3 years. I guess it was 2 years ago. A friend of mine actually left a company and started a new one. And literally the week of our meeting, he was working and drafting his logo. And so he was sending it to me and go, what do you think about my logo? So we literally work with, billion-dollar corporations to startups. And so in everything in between. And so if you're a company that has a touch point at one of those 3, in other words, certain companies, they need access to the CEO or the C-suite exclusively. others don't. Well, we kind of have a place for you to fit in, if you will, but we only offered about 20 companies in each one of those three verticals. So we're limited, and it's by design. We don't want a huge meeting. There's some fantastic ones out there, including HIMSS, but we're much more narrowly focused.
And so that's on for the vendors or the sponsors. What about on the other side of the table?
The provider, yeah. The providers, we have a great group of providers, and some of them I've known for 20 years now. We always kind of joke when I first started the CEO group, which was in 2002. We only had, I think, the first meeting we had 10 CEOs. That's all I had. It's virtually all I knew, and only one of those 10 is still ticking, if you will. The rest of them have all retired, but that was almost 20 years ago, of course. But because of that, we've just continued to grow. We grow through referrals, other CEOs, and literally we're coast to coast, north and south. And supply chain, we've got the BJCs, the HCAs, the John Hopkins, the Cleveland Clinics. We've got kind of the known suspects, and we've got some great ones that people might not know. And it's all because of referrals is how we've grown that group. So again, and they're there for the reason, probably the next question I get frequently is, why do the providers want to come to a meeting like this and take away from their time? The main reason is to learn from experts. And the experts, of course, are the companies who have these solutions, these products, these services. Because you are the expert, and most of these companies are in hundreds of hospitals, in some cases, thousands. Well, you have to remember this supply chain executives or this CEO or this pharmacy executive, they only know their hospital typically, right? They know what's going on in their four walls. But as a company, you can bring a lot of expertise to the table. And that is where it's so helpful for the provider, for that CEO, supply chain, or pharmacy exec to come to our meeting and listen and learn from the companies. But also on the opposite side of that is they get to basically influence the product, service, solutions that are ultimately delivered to them, but because they can say, that's a great idea you have with this product, but it wouldn't work for me. However, if you were to do this, or this, that'd make a huge benefit for us and solve a problem we have. So they do it again for learning and also to be able to impart their information, and influence what's out there.
It's a really interesting model. And actually, in my previous life, I founded and ran a healthcare technology company in the clinical communication space. And I won't name the names, but we did several. One of them actually was a bit more like yours, where, the providers, the executives who were part of it were generally committed to it. And actually it was very much a sort of community thing. Like the meetings they would bring their significant others, their spouses, and they all loved seeing each other because they were sort of like, it was like, twice a year, it was twice a year, they would get together and, they were seeing their friends, which was just great. But genuinely for the sponsors, it was a real value. Like the conversations that we had and the forum that they did it in were sort of focus groups. And yeah, I think we had 4 of them over the course of a couple of days. We'd get genuine input. And, over the course of that, you might also, get some prospective introductions that would lead to business. But, you would genuinely, the value was actually in a lot of the value was genuinely is getting feedback. And then, there's networking, and actually that's kind of where, as a vendor, your deals are going to come out of. The other thing that was sort of interesting was, and there's sort of an added, value, and I don't know whether you do that, was that as a vendor, you would be allowed to attend some of the other vendors' sessions to listen in, as long as they were okay with it. So, I wouldn't, there was never a competitor of mine there anyway, but, somebody might say, yeah, you know what, there's some overlap and we have a partnership with someone else and I'm not comfortable, and then you wouldn't get to go. But it'd be really interesting to hear what the executives were saying about other topics that were adjacent to what you do. And you get a lot of ideas out of it. By counterpoint, I did go to some of the other ones. And again, I'm not going to mention names, where they're a little bit more salesy. And it's sort of like the ones where if you've ever had a sales rep call you and you can't get them off the phone, you'll be familiar with them. Yeah. And I found those to be a less value. Some of the people who went said they would go all the time. They would always get deals out of it. We never got much value out of those. We found the quality of those were not as good. So, that I think the model is really interesting. Tell us a little bit. I mean, how have you dealt with it over the last 2 years? I mean, you run something which is all about an in-person event. How have you handled that in the last 2 years? And how have you still got hair?
Hey, well, it's gray. I got gray hair, but I still have it. But it's been a barrel of monkeys, Adam. I mean, the last, obviously, 2 years has been tough on all of us. And, frankly, I'm just like everybody else. I'm just over it. I'm tired of it. But we figured it out. Yeah. I was fortunate enough, I'm going to put it that way, that my last CEO meeting was in March, the first week of March of 2020. And so literally that week when we were in San Antonio of 2020, the world was changing literally by the hour. And by the time I got them all on the plane and they left on Friday, that weekend, literally the world did change. And so from that point on, I mean, I can remember having calls with a lot of the CEOs in the weeks, right after that. And I was scared to death, be honest with you, just like, what are we going to do? I mean, and they didn't know. A lot of them at that time still didn't have cases. And they're like, well, I'm just sitting here waiting. And then others were like, we're covered up. So what we did, obviously, I upped my communication level with all of those execs and on both the CEO, supply chain, and pharmacy. Excuse me. And so it was the constant, the more I talked to them, the more I learned. And frankly, Adam, because I am kind of in the middle, companies would call me, my friends, my clients, my prospects, and people I know, because I've been doing this for so long. I got that constant question, what are you hearing? What are they saying? Because they couldn't get a phone call back because they had other things on their plate. So that's where, one of the things that I did that I'd never done before was I started doing, quote, interviews just like this. I would call them up. I would ask them, we'd do a Zoom, which, by the way, I'd never hardly done any Zoom or video. I think I'd only done one video call prior to 2020.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was all new to me, but I learned just like everybody else. And so I would interview them, and we'd do 5, 6, 7 minute little interviews and say, what are you seeing in your market? What's your problems? What are your challenges? And then I would post it. And literally those things have gotten hundreds of thousands of views because it was imparting, what was going on. And so that's how part of the way I morphed to do that, to stay current with people. And the other, obviously, we ultimately took our meetings virtually, and we have been virtual until next month. Or in March, we're going to be having our first CEO meeting back again. So it'll be 2 years.
And you've done quite a few webinars, and I've been to several of them, and they're fantastic. I mean, first of all, they're heavily attended, which says, it says a lot about your community and how they really is, and it felt very much like a community. And the other thing that I think you've done really well with those, that's actually, I think, is a good lesson for all of us, is that so many webinars are just kind of like one way, right? And frankly, a lot of the webinars that we do are sort of one way with a panel and using the Q&A, because it's kind of how you manage it. I think the way that you seem to do a lot of them is like they're just open forums and people are respectful and you get discussions going on. I found actually when I started my own business, same sort of situation. Like, funny, I launched my business. I launched and did the big announcement on LinkedIn, and 1 minute later, HIMSS was cancelled, and that was where I was going to go drum up a lot of business. Anyway, and so I started doing webinars, and like yourself, on a smaller scale, frankly, I would have them be open forums where people can talk, and there's so much value. You realize afterwards that a lot of people are going off and having meetings and making connections as a result of that. So, so I think one of the things I think is so smart about what you've done is that you've sort of taken the community from being an in-person community to being a virtual community, which is hard to do.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you saying that, but I honestly, I'll tell you, I needed it just like they did. I mean, because I did have an advantage over some people because I could call somebody and kind of get what was going on. But then I remember the very first time we said, why don't I just put something out there into the friends I know, my close friends, and we just I think we got like 45 or 50 people on a Zoom call.
Yep.
I don't even remember. This might have been in April, May, maybe. And we just talked. And you could literally sense people were scared for their jobs, right? They didn't know if they're going to get fired or what. They were all working from home, and some were literally working off cardboard tables and coffee tables, and they weren't set up to work like this. And then and so that's where I said, okay, this works. These people, they need this community. They didn't want to hear about what's happening. And so that was good for the supplier community. And then the next step after that, obviously, I reached out to some of my providers and I started what we call 20 questions. I said, hey, can I get 3 or 4 of my, CEOs? Let's put together a call. Anybody can come, no cost, come and listen and learn from them, ask them questions. And those just kind of took off. I did them with supply chain CEOs and pharmacy execs, and I plan on doing some more of those. But then we kind of morphed from there to also some, experts, if you will, on certain topics. It could be, value analysis experts, consultants. We did corporate national account selling, GPOs. We did a bunch of different things, leadership and development. So yeah, to me, that's fun, but also I feel like it's good for me. Kind of self-serving. I learned stuff. And to your point, we're very fortunate. I don't charge a penny for any of that stuff I do, but we get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people to come. And so I think it's healthy for everybody.
Oh, I think it's a huge amount of value. And yeah, I think the sort of, if I'm a marketing exec for a healthcare vendor right now, and listening to this, as you might think, well, how does that apply to me? Is that I actually think that some, companies, you need some scale to do this. There are many companies that basically do what you do, themselves. So I think, Health Catalyst is always one which is sort of called out of having, they created a community around healthcare data. And they've done that for, I think, like 10, 15 years now. And that sort of includes events, that includes, lots of webinars, lots of sort of online user groups. Very few companies do that well. And so I just, curious, it's like, if you were advising, a $100 million consulting company or a services company or a technology company on how they could replicate that model themselves of building a community, what would you say to them? How would you say this is how you go about doing it?
That's a really good question. And I would think there's a couple of ways to maybe attack that question, I think, to do it justice. But I'm a huge advocate, obviously, because what we've been talking about is community, right? I believe that there's people out there, your customers, your prospects, they're desperate for information. They want to be accepted. They want to learn. And so if I was a company out there, the first thing I would do is create, now you can easily do it through virtual, user groups, if you will. Create, I'd get my 10 best customers, 10 best people I know. I'd get them here and we'd talk about everything that's bugging them. And it's not necessarily about your product or what you do, but create a resource for them and also to help them network with their other provider friends. That, the guy in, Boca Raton doesn't know the guy in Topeka. Well, there's no reason, if they're customers, they should connect them. You be the middleman. And what I believe about, because first they can help and learn from each other, peer to peer.
Yes.
If you're director of marketing, director of IT, or whatever it is, have those connections created.
Yep.
And then I think what'll happen is if you're the company, you could sometimes just be the middleman and listen and learn. But also at the end, I think it's totally appropriate to say, guys, now that I got you in here, a couple questions for you. We're thinking about doing these 3 things on our product launch or our roadmap. Does this make sense? Use them as your focus group, but more importantly, you create that community forum. Start small. Again, 8, 10, 12 people together can move mountains, rather than try to do this massive shotgun worldwide approach. Create maybe, if you're a large corporation, 100 million plus, maybe you just go by regions. And, you say, we're going to do a Florida, Georgia region or whatever it is. But I just believe that companies miss the boat on connecting their customers with other customers. That's what I would suggest.
That's what I love about that is some practical advice of start small, start with your closest in customers, because they're going to be the ones that are going to be more comfortable doing it. And I so agree with you. They get so much value out of connecting with each other. And then, that community, they'll then invite, their mates in. So, if you give them, if you then give them permission to invite other folks into it, or you selectively invite other folks to attend into it, it then grows organically. But I think a lot of companies, get intimidated by doing it for a variety of reasons, not least of all is that they sort of have these massive plans. They're like, we're going to build this big mega community. And it just is, you get overawed. The other thing is I also think that, to your point about starting with your current customers, is that if you start with, we're going to build a community of people in the industry and, it's going to be open to everybody. Yeah, we'll include our customers, but really what we're really interested in is getting in our prospective customers. Is that it's so hard to get enough people into that community that you get real interaction. You sort of, I found this myself actually with, that at one point I created a community and it was like, it was like crickets. There just were not enough people in this community to get enough discussion. It's very hard to do well.
Well, Adam, one thing I would throw in there, think of this. If I'm a sales guy and I've been hounding, a prospect to do something, and I cannot get any, they're not returning my email, my phone call. Well, let's just say on the outside of this, I've got, a 10, 12, 14 person, CMO group, CMIO, or whatever the group is, that's just rocking. And it's, my current clients, they're digging it. They're loving it. What if I'm the sales rep? Now I call up my prospect and says, hey, no strings attached. Would you like to be a part of this group and listen to these peers? And here's the 6 or 7 of them. They're going to, we're going to let you come in and listen and learn from them. No strings attached. Now I'm not selling you anything. I'm giving you something.
Right.
And I think there's a huge, big difference to push your prospect to something that they get value out of rather than trying to sell them something. And so I'm a huge believer in that. So you call that, that whoever that person is and say, hey, I've got 10 guys, 10 gals, 10 people going to be on this call next Thursday. Once you hop on, no strings attached, listen and learn from them. Here's kind of our little, our loose agenda. We're going to talk about some things that has nothing to do with our product.
Yep. It's about them, right? Yeah.
And now, as a sales rep, I'm bringing value to that person. And guess who they're going to remember? The next time I call, they're going to go, you know what? That's a really good, maybe we ought to sit down. And that was, maybe we ought to call. Let's team up about that. Well, that's how I think it ought to be done.
Very interesting. Actually, I just want to switch gears because you've got a lot of different communities that you manage. So I think one of them is the supply side, the supply managers, the sort of basically the people in purchasing, right?
Right.
Yeah. And I think that, as somebody who's sold into organizations, that they're often seen as sort of like the sort of like the bad guy, or the sort of like the barrier. I think they're a much maligned and misunderstood group. What do you what do you think about that? Do they feel like they're misunderstood?
Well, historically, yeah, I think that that probably fits them pretty well.
They like it that way, do they?
Well, I don't know if they like it that way, but I mean, I think that's the old, they used to, they're the box kicker, they're on the dock, they're downstairs, they're, in the basement. I mean, they're so far from that. I mean, fortunately, I started it 18 years ago, that particular group, it's called the Council of Supply Chain Executives. And since then, that particular skill set, that talent, that has really moved up the organization. Obviously, the last 2 years, we've seen how important supply chain is. Yeah. I mean, if the doc doesn't have, I think there's like a saying, if the doc doesn't have a box, you have an unhappy doc or something. There's something like that. And you got to have the stuff there to treat patients. And so supply chain does that. But they can, obviously, they're trying to be as smart as they can. They got to, negotiate the best price. Obviously, you got to make sure they have enough quantity. All those things play a role in it. And they only have so many hours in the day, so many resources. So a lot of times they do what's in front of them. They use a contract from a GPO and they just go that route. But the smart ones, the good ones, they're more strategic. Yes. They're looking for ways, not necessarily, it's just like this widget costs, 20 cents less, but they're thinking this widget might cost 20% more, but it eliminates 2 steps.
Yep.
Or it might make, my nursing staff happier, or the product could get a patient out 12 hours earlier or whatever. And they're looking at the whole total cost of ownership more so than ever before.
It's so interesting that how strategic that the supply chain organization has become. And in fact, I've heard, several healthcare executives over the last year say, we're completely relooking at the way our supply chain works because we got hammered with this. What are you hearing about? Are you hearing about things they're doing differently, new ideas they're looking at?
Well, clearly they're kind of rethinking their strategy. For decades, the kind of the mantra was just in time inventory. In other words, they didn't want to, they didn't need, if they only needed 5 on the shelf, they didn't want 10, right? They only wanted 5 on the shelf. Well, that's changed. And so just-in-time inventory is now going to, they're restocking to having higher par levels, as they say. They're doing more warehousing than they've ever done before, particularly on certain, products that don't necessarily time out with expiration dates. But a lot of things they are changing. They're getting deeper and looking more into drone delivery, which I think is super cool. Yeah, I've been talking to a few companies that do that. And they literally can drive and fly lab samples, drug samples, and drop them to literally, like pinpoint accuracy. They can put them in these pods. So different things like that, that's coming.
The drones are in the hospital, or are they...
Yeah, they have different ways to do them. One of the ones coming from Europe that I know about, and they've got these pods that they could literally put, looks like a mushroom. It's a large mushroom, if you will, that they can put in like on the the parking garage, if you will. Yep. And so the lab goes up there, they swipe a card, they put in this secure fortified box, if you will, up to like I think 6 or 7 pounds, maybe it's 5 pounds. It's something like that. And then they put it in there. The drone comes in, picks it up automatic. It's all automated. It takes it from there out of the mushroom cloud, opens. It flies like, I think it's like 6, 7, 8 miles without any interaction. And it lands in the other one and drops it and does it. And so then they can real time again, I don't know where it's going to go as far as, delivery of the drugs and those things, but a lot of lab samples now.
It's fascinating. I can't remember where I saw this, but I saw a webinar with I think an executive I think it might have been Samsung. It was one of those kind of companies, and they were talking about sort of they built a new manufacturing plant with drone systems basically built into it. So they have these like drone shafts, and the drones flying all over the place. And so I guess that's like the hospital of the future is probably designed for drones to be able to do stuff. That's really cool. this has been really, really interesting. And, a question I always ask everybody sort of as we get towards the end of these interviews is, if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
Man, I wish you'd asked me that before. Well, I don't think
everybody hates this question.
Yeah, so I don't think it's going to make me cry. But I would say this, Adam. One thing that I think, at least for me, one thing is I've gotten older. I've gotten more self-aware about my insecurities of here and there. But a lot of it has to do with just if I don't have back in the day anyway. If I didn't have complete confidence in something, if it wasn't buttoned up, if it wasn't perfect, I wouldn't move forward with it.
Right.
And I think I've learned now is it doesn't have to be perfect and be good, and it can be rolled out. And I think I can even reflect back. I used to be in orthopedic sales many years ago, implant sales, hips and knees and those things. Yeah. And I can remember when I first started, I got binders upon binders upon binders of, information of anatomy and all this stuff. And I was like overwhelmed and worried and concerned that I'll never remember all this stuff. Well, you know what? I didn't really need a percentage of it. It was like 10% was good enough.
Right.
But I was worried, but then, you just sometimes you just got to go and just have confidence to move forward and kind of stretch yourself. And I think that's kind of, have that growth mentality, but literally the last 2 years doing things like this, I would have never thought I could ever, pull this off with you, I mean, 2 years ago, I couldn't have done it, but I just realized, let's go. And I'm not, and I would tell this to anybody that's listening to this, it doesn't have to be great. Just do it. Just have the gumption to go out and do it. And again, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Just be good.
That's great. I so agree with that. It's, and I think it's an understandable with what you do, when you run these events, these are top notch. I mean, you're some great hotels, that you've got senior executives, there's a lot of money being put into these. It's like there needs to be a lot of attention to detail. But, I agree with you. When you're changing things up and when you're sort of adapting to what we've had to adapt in the last 2 years, it's going to be like everybody's figuring it out. So it's like there's forgiveness for stuff stuff that's rough around the edges.
Agreed. And so.
Well, I tell you what, it's been such a pleasure having you on the podcast today, and I want to thank you so much for your time today. Looking forward to doing more stuff together and continued friendship.
Absolutely, let's do it. This has been fun too. I've enjoyed it. Thanks, Adam.
So before we go, I just want to let the listeners know that you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify. And if you're watching the video, you can get a link down below to get you towards where you can subscribe to it. And if you're listening to the podcast, there should be a link at the bottom to where you can watch the video if you want to see how handsome we both are, particularly Hayes. We've got more guests coming up. We're probably going to do these every couple of weeks, and more to come. So thank you for listening. Thank you to Hayes again for your time today. And anybody listening, if you've got something that you want me to cover, you've got a suggestion of somebody who take part in the podcast, email me at adam@healthlaunchpad.com.